Are you feeling a little spooked out by the thinning veils? Hi, I'm Veronica Lee. This is your weekly transformational forecast for the week of October 31st, 2022, and happy Halloween. This is the time of year where the energies between the living and the dead are slightly closer. So there's often described as a curtain or a veil between the two worlds, and that this time of year, that veil gets thinner and maybe even a little bit more sheer so that we can feel, see, experience, connect with the other side more easily. For those of you who have lost someone, you might notice more dreams, you might notice more senses of connection, or maybe there's more symbology. Let's say if there was a particular animal or song that represented your lost loved one, maybe that'll be a little bit more noticeable or coming to fruition more this week, let's say. But there's also that sense of, renewed grief, coming through. So even though there's that sense of, oh, I'm really sensing my lost loved one, the recognition that you don't have them can often trigger that grief and that feeling of sadness and disconnection. So if you are not necessarily in any kind of place of grief, but are sensing the other side, this is an opportunity where you can potentially connect and seek advice or ask questions, or maybe even gain some insights and support. What I want to say to that, however, though, is that just because someone has died and passed over doesn't mean that they're suddenly more wise. In fact, the closer you can feel them, the more human-like they remain. You have dreams, you feel like you can talk to them, there's more of a sense of who they are. That means their personality is still very much intact. And with that personality, of course, is that human part, which has its inevitable flaws. So yes, they may be a little bit more elevated because now they can recognize the cycle of life and death, and they could recognize their connection to source more easily. But it doesn't mean necessarily that they've completely become enlightened or evolved. And that's okay. There's no judgment there. So with that questioning piece, it would be just as if you were asking them in real life. You would take it, let's say, with a grain of salt. It's like, oh, thanks for this opinion. I really appreciate it, but I'm going to ask a few more people, right? So just recognize that they are there to help. They are there with these big hearts and willing to support, but they may not necessarily be that much wiser. But what I am noticing with this energy is around this grief and sort of melancholy and a sense of disconnection to the living. And what I mean by that is that as we feel that pull into this other realm and we recognize our connection to it, it can make us feel less connected here. And there's no judgment in that either. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't mean, you're predicting your own death or something's wrong with you. It just means that as you're being drawn to this other energy field, you are less available and connected here in ways that help you feel really anchored and grounded. So it might be wise to make sure you offer yourself some kind of anchoring, maybe once or twice a day to this planet, to this 3D existence, to this here and now. Some ways to do that would be to, spend some time in nature. If you have a garden that you want to start planting for the winter, or if you want to just take your dog for a walk, if you want to just go sit outside and enjoy the changing seasons, beauty and weather, then I invite you to do that. Whatever feels right to you, but just listen to what your body needs. It might also be asking for more hearty, wholesome foods, some grounding foods, again, some soups and some heavier kind of substantial foods. In terms of this melancholy, one of the things that you can do is really be tender with it rather than push it away. So in other words, oftentimes when we have uncomfortable feelings, or we think, oh, I lost a loved one, but that was so long ago, I shouldn't be grieving them anymore. Instead, to recognize, wow, there's still a little bit of a wound here, And every once in a while it's going to flare up, and I can just attend to that, right? I can give it my attention and do what needs to be done to, keep it well, to keep moving it toward wellness. And it's not by ignoring it, it's by tending to it. Energetically, I am getting a sense of, I mentioned last week, a lot of brain activity, but it may feel more like there's some pressure, some heavy pressure on the brain and on the head. And part of it is just because of this, divisive place between, this world and the other. And it can make you feel a little bit out of it, but also a little bit, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but pressurized, let's say. So those are the basics for this week. And the key is to really be gentle. I always offer that as, a foundation, because in our culture, we tend to be overly hard on ourselves, expect way too much of ourselves. And gentleness seems to be, afterthought. So if we can keep this idea of gentleness and compassion as a way of being, it makes moving through these processes of our own everyday life and our spiritual growth that much more easy. Have a good rest of your week.